And I was thinking about it that last year, and some of you who were here, and especially Mangesh remembers that, uh, when we finished the mega stretch last year, exactly 2 days later, we went off on a holiday to a place called Germany. And when we went to Germany, I think we had one of the most remarkable experiences. Everybody knows Germany by Berlin and by Munich and by all the other great cities. And but when you land up there and you're about to check into a hotel in Munich, actually, we happened to see in a fleeting few seconds 3 of the world's greatest football players, all following each other in tandem. From the team called, would you like to add to that, Moni? Which team was that? Sorry? Barcelona, FC Barcelona. So the 3 players were, come on, Messi, yes. Suarez, Neymar, absolutely. So you had 3 of the world's best football players. Now the world dies to see them. When we entered into the hotel in Munich, okay, I thought this was a surprise welcome being given by the Dale Carnegie franchise, because there were like flashbulbs and red carpet and what have you. And seeing the 3 football players there was quite a revolution. But, you know, honestly, while that was a great experience, when we were there in Munich, there was a trip that we made to a place which is 16 kilometers away from that city. And that place is called Dachau. How many of you have heard of a place called Dachau? Anybody has heard of a place called Dachau? Well, I'm glad you haven't, because I'm happy to share it with you. Yep. Dachau, it was actually the first place that in Adolf Hitler's great attempt to purify Germany, or what he called as the evils of the earth, was the first concentration camp ever set in Germany. Dachau was the first experiment with the torture and destruction and death of humanity. Dachau was a 16-kilometer drive, and I remember when we entered there, there was a remarkable sense of stillness. And it's absolutely, you know, in my mind, stunning that Germany as a country continues to maintain Dachau, a reminder of horrific crimes. And it's not just a maintenance they do. They give you details. From the time you enter Dachau, you feel as if you're in a place of pilgrimage and homage. It's almost a place where you believe you're connecting with a part of human civilization that experienced possibly the worst pain possible as they were destroyed by another fellow human being. You could see stories in graphic detail, and I'm not going to narrate them because they're too horrific to be recounted. But nobody was spared. Officially, the figures there are around 32,000 people who were tortured and killed. And they were not ordinary prisoners. They were writers, they were philosophers, they were actors, they were novelists, they were poets, they were singers, they were intellectuals, they were musicians, they were businessmen. I don't know what the ultimate figures are, but I do have an idea, roughly, that the number of Jews who were killed in Europe during the Holocaust, as it got to be called, numbered approximately around 6 million Jews. 6 million Jews is 60 lakh people. 60 lakh people were killed between 1933 to 1945. I was reminded, actually, when I was in Dachau, of having made a similar visit when I was in Washington. And Washington, too, has a war memorial. And I remember this particular video because it linked to me what I saw. And it was a video that reminded me of the power of the human spirit. In Washington, they displayed shoes of all the prisoners because they were taken off them before they were sent to the gas chamber. You could see places where people were made to stand continuous for 24 hours so that their bodies weakened. 24 hours standing. You saw a chamber where they were told falsely that you're going for a bath. And they were made to take their clothes off before they actually went into a room where they were gassed to death. Their clothes were therefore saved to be used for the other people. This was humanity consisting of people like you and me. I linked it back to what I saw in Washington. A video of a woman who was in her 90s. I don't even know whether she's alive now. She was a war survivor. And I remember very, very distinctly what she said. She narrated her story, and in her story she mentioned that when she was young, because obviously she was very young when she went through the entire concentration camp, she lost her husband, who was shot. Her kids were taken away from her. She never knew what really happened to them. Her family was torn apart. And she went on to just survive the concentration camp by some great providence and luck. She was given up for dead. And then she was just about saved when the Allies finally won the war in 1945. But in that video, she made a statement. And that statement remained with me, which I heard it in my first visit to the United States in the year 1997. And in that video, she said, as part of her story, she was telling the interviewer, I think, famous words. And those words were, giving up is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. They asked her, what made you survive it? And she said that giving up is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. I remembered it because I happened to be in Germany, and it was an insistence that we all had that we need to visit Dachau. You know, end of day, when you think about it, and all of you have read, hopefully, the book, if not parts of it, you'll realize there is something amazing about the Dale Carnegie book, How to Win Friends and Influence People, or How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. None of these books actually give you a mathematical input-output ratio to make your life beautiful. There is no formula. There is no 2x plus 2y is equal to what? Or 2x into 2y is equal to 4xy. There is no formula. If you look at Dale Carnegie's book, if you heard what this lady of the age of 90 said, it talked about an intangible. Spirit, belief, faith. Keeping the faith, that belief, is so critical. You look at Dale Carnegie's couple of principles. Count your blessings, not your troubles. And yet you'll ask yourself, how often do you and me, all of us in the room at some point, tend to not remember it? We actually own this principle. All of us in this room own the principle. We actually go to classrooms, and in our conversations, we propagate it to the world. But ask yourselves how often we desert this very faith on our own. How often do we forget what's right for the one trifling reason that bothers us? When Dale Carnegie says, don't criticize, condemn, and complain, you know how difficult that is. We all know how difficult that is. When you look back at the fact that, end of day, when he says smile, and it becomes an absolutely Herculean task because you're distracted by your own priorities, your own anxieties, and sometimes your own misconceived notions. Carnegie has no formula. His book is actually a narrative of stories of people like you and me. Like that old lady who said, giving up is a permanent solution to a temporary problem. It's very interesting because end of day, at some point 80 years ago, a similar drama happened to play out in Adolf Hitler's Germany. At the time when Germany was already perpetuating human crimes. There was a man who landed on the shores of Berlin, or rather Germany, to prove something to himself. In his own words, he called himself a term that we don't use anymore. He called himself a South-based, or rather a Southern-based Negro. He was a man who was almost given up as a young child to be dead because he belonged to a poor family of Afro-Americans. He was seventh in a family of 8, and he was weak and he was suffering, and his family could not afford him medication. He was almost given up for dead. But you know, there's something called his determination and human spirit. And you know what he did? He started to become a runner. And he ran and he ran and he ran. And when he ran, ladies and gentlemen, the story goes that he one day outran Adolf Hitler. In 1936, he landed with his contingent from the United States of America in Berlin for the Olympics. Just think about it for a second. Olympics. You know, the most looked after, the most eagerly awaited, the most coveted event of an Olympics is the 100-meter dash. Because they say the 100-meter dash is the fastest man on earth. Because over 100 meters, it tells you whether you're a bullet or a butterfly. For a moment, just think about it, what it takes to be, what takes you to that level. You practice for 4 years. 4 long years you practice. Your diet, you're getting up in the morning, you're running against the wind, you're running at different times of the day, because you don't know what time will the Olympic event be held. You don't know what the wind conditions will be. You don't know whether it's going to be a sky or a rainfall or the tracks could be wet. You practice in all conditions, and your life is determined in less than 8.5 seconds. For 4 years you practice, and your success or failure is determined by 8.5 seconds if you go by the latest world records. To become the champion, I saw Usain Bolt up there on one of the presentations. It takes him 4 years of those protein shakes, of those hours spent in the gym, of those multiple hours swimming, of sleeping at 8 o'clock in the night to wake up at 5 in the morning to start getting fit. It's all over in 9 seconds and less. Isn't that an endeavor of a human spirit, that you have the faith in you that at the end of 4 years you'll still make it? None of you in this room will remember who came second in the last Olympics. You'll all tell me Usain Bolt won it. But none of you will remember who came second, who came third, who came fourth. But I'll tell you something else. You know what is the difference between the guy who wins the race and the guy who comes last in the 100-meter race? Well, I'll tell you, here goes. That's it. It's over. That's the difference between the guy who comes first and the guy who comes last. It's a fraction of a second. In a fraction of a second, there's one guy who takes a lap around the field with a gold medal and sends his country into a dizzy. For the rest of the 7 who worked for 4 years and did as many hours, if not maybe more, they may be getting the silver and the gold, but they are not the champions. So what makes people propel to do what they do is faith. Is a faith that I will do it, although I know it's going to be one hell of an Olympian task. Interestingly, and this is the point I want to make, that when you think about it in its real depth, these challenges and these thoughts must have been also in the mind of the man who landed in Berlin. He was born in the year 1913. And Hitler had wanted to be there in the Olympic Stadium because he wanted to prove not just to the people who were participating in the Olympics, but to the world, that the Aryan race was superior. And the Jews and the Afro-Americans and everybody else who was a minority in his eyes needed to be defeated, destroyed, and devastated. But here was an Afro-American runner, then called a Negro or a black, who was getting onto the tracks. Now for the interesting part. He won the 100-meter race. He won the 200-meter race. He won the 400-meter gold relay. 3 gold medals in front of Adolf Hitler, won by a black whom Adolf Hitler treated with contempt and disgrace. With a crowd booing against them, here was a man challenging the winds. But now comes the twist in the tale. The last athletic event that he had qualified for was the long jump. And the long jump was one where you get 3 chances. When he went for his first run for the long jump, he fouled himself. So no matter how long he jumped, it was a foul. He took a second chance. You have 3 chances. He took a second one, and he got fouled again. He had a break of around 12 minutes before he was going to take his third run. And this, by the way, is a man who had already won 3 gold medals. And the crowd in that Olympic stadium over those days had begun to admire a real hero. There was a guy who came to him at the end of it, before his third run, and came and called him by the side and said, "Listen, you're making a big mistake." He said, "What?" He said, "You know the mistake you're making, you're running too close to the board. So why don't you make the long jump a little before, take a few inches off. It doesn't matter if you might miss the record, but at least you'll have a legitimate jump." So he said, "I'm going to put a towel a little ahead of the board. It'll give you a mental inkling of where it is, because when you run up to do the long jump, you just have a fraction of a second to know where the board ends and where your feet need to begin." So he came and he said, "I'll put a towel for you." He heard him out and he said, "Okay, let me do that." So he ran the last and the final opportunity he had for the long jump. He came close to the board and he took the leap. And the leap took him to a remarkable jump that actually smashed the Olympic record of that time. He had broken the Olympic record on the last shot that he had. You know what's interesting? The guy who told him to make the jump was the guy who held the Olympic record just 2 jumps before. And that guy was called Laz Long. Interestingly, he happened to be a German. Okay? The man who did those 4 gold medals in the year 1992, ladies and gentlemen, the German government, now post its entire pretty macabre history, and perhaps now the most welcoming democracy in the world, named a street after him right opposite the Olympic Stadium. And it's called the Jesse Owens Strasse. The athlete I've talked about, you know who it is, James Cleveland Owens. The story dates to 80 years ago. Interestingly, Jesse Owens died in the year 1980. And he was, I think, 67 when he died. I look back at what I've seen over the last 2 days here. And I'll tell you what I feel. I feel that as we move ahead here from one zone to another, Pallavi's presentation yesterday started off with that big statement of next is now. We have talked about a quantum growth and then a bigger growth and then a bigger leap. We all know it's possible. We all know it's doable. We all know it's there for us to get it. But to make it happen, part of our preparedness will have to be that it's not going to be easy. One of the things that all of you in this room will have to understand, that in the process of trying to get where we should be, there'll be times when the CSD will not be able to deliver their packet on time. Don't smother them with a pillow for that. There will be a day when a trainer will have a bad hair day. It's not going to be the end of the world. There will be some salespeople who will encounter some rough weather. It won't be a shipwreck. There'll be times when finance will have a tough time trying to make its cost-cutting targets be met. It won't necessarily be the sky falling on our heads. But it will definitely test our character. It will test our character because all of us should know that when you're trying to scale up, there will be organizational unhappiness at some points. And your ability, each one in this room, each team leader in this room, including Pallavi, me, and everybody else, each of us will have a role to play. Remember, just a few days ago, Apple reported its first loss in 13 years. And it was not a loss. It was just a decline in revenue. Imagine their revenue, just a decline in revenue in 13 years because iPhone sales went down. And the world talked about it as if Apple is suddenly no longer the world's most valued company. Remember, as you raise the bar, the challenges become trickier, more difficult. And therefore, I believe when I hear everybody here, when end of day we are talking about all these wonderful presentations and your vigor and your passion and your energy, which is so palpable, then the reality that we all face today is that we have it in us, the drive, the necessary wherewithal to take it. Intelligence, skill, talent, all exists. But your character, ladies and gentlemen, is tested when the winds don't blow your way, when the tailwinds become the headwinds, when the sky becomes just a little bit darker, when there's no such thing as optimum, perfection takes a backseat, and you feel as if the world around you is suddenly looking a little slippery. We all turn out to become cynics. We all tend to say, you know what, we spent 2 fantastic days at Mumbai, but are we there yet? Are we sure? What happens to us is we begin to lose the faith. Pallavi's presentation and many of the others highlighted the importance of what future is. And we all know where we are headed. We are living in a world, and we all know that, of smartphones that are becoming more powerful by the day. Nobody now carries a video camera. I didn't see anybody here with a video camera. We are with the world of artificial intelligence. We talk now of big data. We are in the world of gigabytes, drones. Everything is now becoming so remarkably technologically savvy. But I think one of you mentioned in one of your presentations that in the age of robots, where do we stand? Let me tell you the truth. The robots have the brain. What they don't have is what you and I have. That's a heart. A robot doesn't have a heart, it has a brain. And what distinguishes humanity, what distinguishes all of us in this room, including those who did some horrific crimes in the 1930s when the world went through its worst periods, they too had a heart, they didn't exercise it. It's that heart, it's that human spirit, it's that little thing, that intangible, that transports you from one place to another. It's your belief. It's the belief that all of us in this room, including that notorious bunch at the back of trainers, teaches day in and day out. And I think half our battle is won. Half our battle is won, ladies and gentlemen, if we realize that the things we do, whether we train in leadership, whether we train in sales, whether we train in Dale Carnegie, whether we're talking high impact presentations, whether we are doing any of the programs that is there in our IMAP system, in everything that we do, we do something remarkable. I think what we all do in this room is extraordinary. The people who sell this great idea, the people who deliver this great idea, and the wonderful people who support it through multiple back office operations to make your entire journey to a customer experience a wonderful one. In a great number of ways, you don't know it. But you know, when we talk about the 250,000 people we have trained over the last several years, or the 66,000 people we'll have trained over last year, you don't know how you have changed lives. I met somebody who told me, Sanjay, you know what, every time I travel like crazy. I spend several nights in fancy hotels all by myself. And I always keep How to Stop Burning and Start Living by my bedside. And that's the power of what we carry. That intangible, ladies and gentlemen, that you and I in this room should never, never lose faith in. Because that's what we do, and that's what we do exceptionally well. A few months ago, if you remember, or rather a few weeks ago, there was a tournament that ended with a great high, and a team most unexpected to win won the World Cup. And that team, by the way, when it started the tournament, did not have a kit, did not have a sponsor, was driven out by its own cricket board, and it had to run helter and skelter to get his jerseys right. And if you heard the captain in several interviews, he kept saying, they kept asking him, so how did you do it? And he kept saying, believe. He kept saying, believe. He kept saying, believe. These are not empty words, they're the words of a champion, like Jesse Owens. And to me, that wonderful woman who saw depravity, depression, and loss, but never lost faith. I think that fundamental principle, in a great number of ways, will define our journey. It was wow last year. It is next is now. Next year we'll come up with something even more brilliant. But as we all leave tonight, after having spent 2 days together, just remember, what will matter most to you as you get to our offices on Monday and get going is keep the faith. Thank you very much.